Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you all doing? It's the tail end of summer of August, so hopefully wherever you are, you're keeping cool or preparing for school or enjoying the new start of the school year. We are just waiting a moment to make sure everybody's gotten in, and we'll start shortly. In the meantime, if you have a chance to just input into the chat your school district, where you're from, what state you're from, and perhaps, if this is the first time you've been to this webinar, that would be great. My name is Cherie Seema. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools, or NAFIS. And today I have on staff with me Jason Schimenti, our Advocacy Director, as well as Ann O'Brien, our Communications Director. So thank you for sharing that, Prince George County, San Diego Unified. Yay. Welcome, Vanessa. Fort Thomas. Oh, great. Gallup McKinney. Oh, New Mexico. Welcome, welcome. Yay, Adria Numata. I'm from Hawaii, so this is great. Oh, good. Fallon. Oh, Fallon. I recognize a lot of these names, so that's good. Thank you so much. This is so helpful. Well, I hope that today you'll get a lot of out of our session. This is something we do periodically for new members, but also for our seasoned members. I know we have some seasoned members on the call today, but we're excited to get started. But whether you're new to Impact Aid or you're a new federally impacted district or just looking for a refresher, we're hoping to make sure that you can understand where we are as a NAFIS organization, but also the Impact Aid overall, what it is, what it does, and how it works. Um, just feel free to put questions in the chat as we go, and we'll answer some of those as we go along, especially if it pertains to that particular topic. I'll be able to monitor that chat. But again, we'll have a Q&A at the end, so if you want to withhold that to the end, that's certainly fine as well. As I mentioned, we're going to cover what Impact Aid is. Jason, if you can do the first slide. Why the program exists, who qualifies, and how the payments are calculated, and finally, some of NAFIS's current advocacy priorities under Jason. So about NAFIS, for those of you who may be new, we are the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools. We were founded in 1973 and we just recently celebrated our anniversary. We're a nonprofit and nonpartisan association representing school districts that receive federal impact aid. Our primary goal is advocacy, as you know, but our charge is really to educate Congress and the administration about impact aid and the needs of our federally impacted districts. We also provide technical assistance through our workshops to districts and congressional offices, coordinate the Impact Aid Caucus, and support the 4 Impact Aid subgroups, which we'll kind of delve into a little bit later. So what is NAFIS? So I often describe it in 3 ways. We are your voice on Capitol Hill. We are a resource for impact aid information and technical assistance, and we have a professional network of connecting people who understand the unique challenges that fully impacted districts face. We also keep members informed through our weekly newsletters, action alerts, and 2 annual conferences and social media. So if you haven't signed up for or aware of the next fall conference, it's upcoming on September 20th to 22nd here in Washington, D.C. We do twice a year. We can drop the link in the chat if you are interested in registering. Also, we send out weekly newsletters and action alerts, so that keeps you updated on what's happening here in DC, but also what's going on for that Impact Aid program. And if we need you to help us, contact your congressionals on the Hill. So if you're interested in getting onto that listserv, you can happily email info@nafisdc.org to join our mailing list. And finally, we do have social media. And you can find us at NAFIS Schools on Facebook. We're also available on Twitter / X now known as X. So if you're interested, please connect with us online and on email. Okay, next one. So the Impact Aid community is very diverse. So within NAFIS, we have 4 subgroups representing 4 different types of federal impaction. The first is FLISA, the federal lands districts that receive 702 funds, so FLISA, headed by Tom Schneider. We have the LOISA group, headed by Jim Saruda, called the Learning Opportunity Impacted Schools Association. And those are schools that receive 50% or less in our funding. or under 50%, excuse me. And MISA represents the military impacted schools that serve a large number of military districts. So pretty diverse. And finally, we have NISA, which represents the Indian Lands Impacted School Districts. So again, four subgroups that are under our umbrella, but we work with them to support the Impact Aid program. Each of them are a little bit different, as I mentioned, and as a school district, you may be interested in connecting with those subgroups as well, because they do have membership and they do have priorities that they work on. So again, if you're coming to the conference or you're interested in learning more about these subgroups, we can connect you or you can find them online. The issues affecting each of the group can be different, but we work together to support the Impact Aid and the common interest of protecting the overall program. So again, all about connectivity, all about working together and really making sure that Impact Aid funding continues to flow to your districts. Next. So what is Impact Aid? So in some, it recognizes the presence of the federal government. Impact Aid recognizes that the presence of the federal government can affect the local school district's ability to raise revenue. So the program is designed to, one, reimburse school districts when federal land is removed from the local tax rolls due to federal activity. And this is under Section 702, federal properties. The second way is to compensate local school districts for additional costs associated with the presence of those federal properties in your communities. That it falls under Section 703 or basic support. So overall, Impact Aid is the federal government's mechanism for helping compensate school districts for this federal impact within your communities. So what does this mean? So typical school district revenue, and to understand this, it helps to first think about how school districts are funded. So typically, right, school districts receive a combination of state and local generated revenue. About 50% come from state funds, 50% in local taxes, much of which comes from the taxes and fees on those local homes and businesses in your community. And while the percentages vary differently by state, it's due to the federal presence within your communities that decreases the amount of the taxes and the fees collected. So again, because of the federal presence, you're unable to collect that taxes or revenue. And so Impact Aid is the way the government pays their tax bill to your community. So overall, the important point to remember is that the local property value usually plays an important role in supporting your public schools education and schools within your communities. Okay. So next slide. So when the federal government owns land, now imagine that a significant portion of your property in your district is owned by the federal government, right? That property is removed from the tax rolls, and at the same time, there may be additional students associated with that federal activity who attend those local schools. So the district may have fewer opportunities to generate local tax revenue while still having the responsibility for educating those children and all the students within that community that attends that particular public school or district. That is the federal impaction that we're speaking of. Okay. So what are some of the examples of federal impaction? So it could be in many forms. A military installation in your community, any kind of Indian land or trust or restricted lands or Alaska Native Settlement Claim Settlement Act land within your communities, federal low-rent housing facilities. I want to note that not all low-rent housing facilities are covered under this umbrella. They do have to be HUD owned. Okay. Civil service activities are like VA hospitals, national laboratories, national parks. There's a variety of different kinds of federal impaction that happens in each community, and every community is just a little bit different, which is why even though these schools fall under Impact Aid, they might seem a little bit different on how they qualify. So Impact Aid is the oldest elementary and secondary education program. It was signed into law on September 23rd, 1950, which is absolutely amazing because it's so old. But it is originally intended to address the cost of construction within the school facility. So this is the first time it was recognized that it was a federal obligation to support these school districts in those communities. Okay. Next. And then a week later, the next law was signed, Public Law 81-874. And this was, again, just defining a broader definition of the federal activities in that particular area, basically based on defense and war activities within that community, such as military bases. So again, there's a lot of ways you can be categorized in this particular section, but we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation. So, and this is Impact Aid does fall under Title VII of ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. And again, this is not something you have to remember, but just know it's one of the several titles under the Department of Education currently. It was most recently authorized in 2015, and it is complex. It is based on a formula, and there are nuances to the formula depending on which subgroup you're under. And you can qualify for multiple areas within Impact Aid as a district, depending on what you qualify for based on the federal impact in your community. So again, it is technically complicated, but again, we're here to help, and so is the Department of Ed. Okay. One thing great about this program is that every dollar that's appropriated by Congress goes directly to the school district. It's an obligation. It doesn't go to the state particularly, although we do have some states that are still under equalization. But we do have the ability to, once that funds go to your school district, your school board can designate those impact aid funds for whatever you deem appropriate under law. So it can be used for teacher salaries. It can be used for substitutes. I know that's what we pay for it in Hawaii. Can be used for materials, class curriculum, technology, transportation. There's numerous ways that you can utilize the money as long as it falls within the obligations of your school district and your state law. But it's flexible funding, and that's the best part about this funding. It's not designated specifically for a program or use. Okay. And so it does make up for lost local revenue. It doesn't provide supplemental funding for a student like IDA or Korean Tech Ed or Title I or other title programs. States cannot consider impact aid in determining state aid. And like I mentioned before, the exception really is equalization, which if you're from New Mexico, you're the only area or state that still has equalization within your realm. So that is a little bit different within your state. So in impact aid law, there are 13 sections total, so broad, but we're going to focus on 4 sections. There are 4 sections under impact aid, but there are 2 that we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason to talk a little bit more about section 702, and Anne will talk a little bit more about 703. Jason?
Thank you, Sharice. So in these next few slides, we'll discuss the Section 702 Federal Property Program. While the federal government takes ownership of land, the property comes off the tax rolls. However, school districts must continue to educate students in their district with less tax revenue. This section of the program is designed specifically to help ease that burden. However, Section 7002 is funded at significantly less than the identified need. In fiscal year 2026, Congress appropriated $80 million for this section of the Impact Aid program. To fully fund the program, Congress would need to appropriate a total of $1.3 billion. To be eligible for Section 702 payments, property must have been acquired by the federal government after 1938. When acquired, the property is 10% or more of the assessed value of the taxable property in the district. The property cannot have been acquired in exchange for other federal property. And finally, the school districts must not be substantially compensated by the increase in revenues from federal activities from the property. In fiscal year 2026, 202 school districts were eligible for 702 payments. 56 of those districts also received basic support payments. As Sharice mentioned earlier, eligible lands include Army Corps of Engineer projects, national forests, national grasslands, laboratories, federally owned dams, reservoirs, and more. Eligible districts are paid either a foundation payment, which equals 90% of the payment received in fiscal year 2009, or an average payment for fiscal years 2006 to fiscal year 2009 combined. After foundation payments are made, newly identified eligible applicants are paid on a prorated basis with the remaining Section 7002 funds. Here's an excerpt from our annual Impact Aid payments overview, which provides a snapshot of how Impact Aid funds are distributed in each state and district. This is a bit of a preview. We're still wrapping up our final edits on the FY26 payments overview, so you can kind of look for that in the next week or so, and we'll have all of the states available for you to view. Here we see 702 payments in Michigan for FY26. They're broken down by school district, congressional district, or districts. Some of your districts will cross over more than one congressional district. So we do our best to provide an accurate scope of how many congressional districts that you intersect with. We'll also include federal acres, total acres, percentage of federal acres, FY26 actual payment, and what the full payment would have been if the 702 program had been fully funded. A dash, just a quick note, a dash in the full funding payment column denotes a school district that has selected the opt-out option for Section 702 application and chose to only receive their foundation payment, foregoing their final payment. In summary, these school districts have had tax revenues substantially reduced because the federal government took ownership of the land. The federal government doesn't pay taxes. The Impact Aid attempts to make up for that tax loss, but does so at a rate of only 6.2 cents on the dollar as of FY26. Now I'll turn it over to Anne to discuss the basic support program.
Great, thank you, Jason. The Basic Support Program, Section 7003, is the largest section of the Impact Aid program, both in terms of the appropriations, the money that the federal government gives it to spend, and the number of school districts or local educational agencies that receive funds. So for FY26, it was $1.477 billion, serving 929 school districts or LEAs. We talk mainly about 7003B, which is the Basic Support Program. There's another section within 7003, which is Section D, which is Payment for Children with Disabilities. So we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. As I try and take control here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about eligibility as well as the factors that go into an Impact Aid payment and some of the requirements for the program. So Section 703 eligibility. You can be eligible for the Section 703 program if you either have 400 federally connected students in ADA, so that's average daily attendance. That's not straight enrollment. It has to be an average daily attendance. Or 3% of your ADA is made up of federally connected students. The law defines several categories of federally connected students, and each of these categories corresponds to a number or a letter in the law, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but these are the general categories. So ones are reside on federal property with a parent employed on federal property. So we call those our civilian live on, work on. They reside on federal property with a parent on active duty in the uniformed services. We call those our military on-base kids. Reside on Indian Trust Restricted or Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act lands. We call those our Indian lands kids. They have a parent on active duty in the uniformed services, but do not live on federal property. So those are military off-base kids. They reside in federal low-rent housing. And as Sharice mentioned, that really is only those federal projects. It's not like Section 8 housing or other local low-rent housing. It is those federal projects, and those are all low-rent housing kids. And then there are the students who have a parent who either resides on or works on federal property. So those are civilian live on or work on kids. For those kids, there's a higher eligibility threshold. So to count the civilian live on or work on, you have to have either 1,000 in ADA or they need to make up 10% of your average daily attendance. The 703 payments are based on several factors that include the number and type of federally connected students in average daily attendance or ADA, the cost of education, and this is one of the reasons that Impact Aid is a unique federal education program. It is based on the actual cost, the real cost of educating students. In the payment formula that is measured or represented by what's called the LCR, the local contribution rate. Payments take into account school district need. That is measured by the learning opportunity threshold lot. And it also takes into account congressional appropriations, which is the money that Congress actually gives the Impact Aid program to spend. That will determine what's known as the lot percentage payout. So we're going to talk a little bit more about each of those factors. Because the payment formula includes the number of students in the school system, you have to count them, and you have to count them every year. Now, a few years back, due to COVID and some of the enrollment fluctuations and the challenges of online versus hybrid versus in-person schooling, there was legislation passed that allowed you to use previous year's numbers. That is over. Those times are over. You need to count your students every year. You get to pick the date on which you're counting them, and that has to be at least 3 days after the school year starts, and it has to be before January 31st. You then will submit the student count on the Impact Aid application. Typically, the Impact Aid application is due January 31st of any given year. Because January 31st is falling on a Sunday for 2027, the expectation is it will be due February 1st instead of January 31st. So that would be the day you want to have it in by. You'd actually want to have it in 2 or 3 weeks before that. But the absolute last date you'll be able to submit it is likely February 1st, 2027. Now, if something comes up between the time you submit the application and June 30th, you are able to amend it. So you can amend it by June 30th, but you're going to want to conduct your student count earlier in the year and then get your application in to avoid any hiccups by that application deadline. There are several different ways you can choose to count your students. One is a parent-pupil survey form. That can be a backpack letter that goes, home with the kid. The parent signs it, verifies their address. Depending on where that child lives, it may require additional certification from the BIA or HUD or another housing official, but that's certainly one option you have is that parent-pupil survey form. You can also participate in the department's electronic data collection program. That will allow you to use your student information system to conduct your student survey, and that's really mainly designed for those school districts that use parent-pupil survey forms. There are also ways that you can do parent-pupil survey forms electronically, such as fillable PDFs that do not require actually going through the electronic data collection process, but you're going to want to talk to your state analyst at the U.S. Department of Education about that. So the parent-pupil survey form is one where the parent directly verifies their information. There's also an option known as a source check. Now that is where you as a school system would fill out a spreadsheet or other kind of data sharing system that has the required information. So like a student's first name, last name, the address that they live at, whether they have an IEP. And there would be a school official who certifies that those students are enrolled in the district on the count date. You'd then hand that form over to a federal official who would certify the kid's connection to whatever federal property you were claiming, their residence on. So, or their connection. So it might be an Indian Lands official who verifies that the children each lived at the address on the count date. It might be a military official who verifies, that the parents were on active duty as of the count date. So there's different certifications that are required. The main thing is the connection to federal land. If you cannot verify a student's connection to federal land, you cannot count them for impact aid. You have to have, again, either that source check or that survey form that says that they are connected. So this is an example of a sample parent-pupil survey form. This is developed by the Department of Education. It's available on their website. Sharice has been dropping the links to that in the chat. You can look this over. Your school district might already have a survey form. But if you are going to update your survey form, or if you're applying for the first time and you want to make sure that you're collecting the correct information, you want to run that by your Impact Aid program analyst as well, just to make sure that you're getting all the right information. And this is an example of that source check form. And this is for C students. And as I mentioned, each of those student categories has a letter associated with this. C is Indian Trust and Restricted Land, or this particular form is. And it has the categories that you're required to verify in order to count the kids for impact aid. This is the signature block for that source check. And again, so you see who is required to sign it and the type of data that you're required to verify. Again, this is available on the U.S. Department of Education website. And if you look down kind of at the very bottom of that spreadsheet, you'll see all the different letters. So this one, again, happens to be those Category C kids, but they have them available for, AI, B, D, E. Anyone you need, you just go to that impactaid.ed.gov and you can find that sample source check form. When you're doing your student count, you want to keep a few things in mind. And one of them is that many LEAs have lost eligibility because their forms do not collect the appropriate data. There is very specific data that you need to collect on the kids, so you want to make sure your forms do that. And again, that is why we recommend that you, anytime you're updating your form or so trying to qualify for the first time, that you submit that to your impact data analyst to make sure you're getting everything the first time. Without prior approval, you could lose funds for incomplete data. You're going to need to keep these records, these forms, for 3 years after the final payment. So historically, that's been approximately 5 years in total. The Impact Aid Program Office, or now known as the Division of Impact Aid Programs, is doing a really good job of getting payments out more quickly than they historically have been. So it's perhaps a little less than that now, but you are going to, as a baseline, just plan on keeping those records for 5 years in total. How many federally connected children are there? Well, nationwide, it's less than it used to be. So here's just kind of a sampling over the past several years of what's happening in terms of federally connected kids. And you look, back at 2015, then you jump to like 2023. There was already a decrease there, but there was a big decrease between 23 and 24. And that is because that is the first time that those post-COVID enrollment numbers were required to be used. There's another drop in 25, and then this past year, actually, there was a small increase in the number of federally connected students. So in total, we say there's 8 million students in federally impacted school districts. And that's because, well, only 638,555 of them are considered federally connected. Impact Aid actually benefits all students in the school district. It's just like, payment in lieu of taxes. My property tax dollars go to the school system for all children, not just my own. And that's the same with Impact Aid. It benefits all the students enrolled in that system. Something else to consider about the Impact Aid program payment formula is that you aren't actually paid on the direct number of kids that you have. So not only are you turning those federally connected kids into ADA, you also, because different types of students have different types of financial impacts on school districts, are turning them into student weights. So each category of student has a different weight, and ultimately you'll get paid on weighted student units. You don't get paid on children. And these are those weights. So the Indian Land students have a weight of 1.25. Military dependent students and civilian students residing on federal property both have a weight of 1.0. Military off-base kids are 0.20. Federal low-rent housing kids are 0.1. And those civilian students whose parents live on or work on federal property are 0.05. And just thinking about, how these kids impact these districts. If you're thinking about a military student who resides on a military installation, they're living in housing that's not providing property tax revenue for the school district or the locale. Whereas military students who live in off-base housing in privately owned property that is generating that revenue, that impact is considered a little differently. And that is why the weights are, as they are. This is just an example of how those weighted student units apply to the numbers of students. So if you have, 100 of each of those types of students, Indian Lands, military, on and off, low rent housing, and civilian live or work on, and assuming those civilian live or work on meet that 10% threshold, you'd first convert them to ADA. So again, you're not looking at 100 kids, you're looking at let's say your ADA ratio is, 93.7%. You'd get to 93.7 as your number, and then you would apply the weights. So if you're looking at those weights, that's, you see, you start with 500 students, And ultimately, you end up with 243.6 weighted student units. That is the number that's going to be used in your impact aid payment calculation. Also, as we mentioned earlier, impact aid basic support formula considers the actual cost of education with what's known as the local contribution rate, the LCR. In most cases, that's determined by the National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, and you don't have to do anything. That is automatically calculated. There are actually 3 different options that are automatically calculated, and the department is going to give you the highest of those. So you don't have to do anything there. Typically, most school districts use either half the national average per pupil expenditure or half the state average per pupil expenditure. And that number comes from, what Sharice was mentioning earlier, that there's this idea that half of the cost of students' education spending is based on state property taxes and fees and comes from the state. And then the other half is based on those local taxes and fees. And that is the half that impact aid is replacing. There is a 4th method. So there's half the national, half the state average per pupil expenditures too. And then there's something called the percent local revenue, which is for school districts in states that spend a lot of money on education, but also rely heavily on local contributions. There's only a handful across the country of school districts that use that. And then there's also a method known as generally comparable districts. And that is a different method that requires cooperation between the State Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Education. And so that is another option for those interested in diving more deeply and working with their states if they're not happy with their general or their existing LCR. So those are all the factors kind of getting into this maximum payment or the full funding payment. So how you actually calculate that payment is you take that weighted federal student units, you multiply it by that LCR, and you get your full funding payment. And so if you look at those examples there, that's an example of taking our 243.6 weighted student units and converting that to a maximum payment. And that's based on the LCRs over the past 3 years or 2 years, and then the upcoming one for FY27. You'll see as the LCR goes up, even if your student kid count doesn't go up, your maximum payment grows up. And that's great news. A challenge that exists is that there is not enough money appropriated by Congress to fully fund every school district's maximum payment. So there has to be a way to prorate the appropriation to determine what amount school districts actually get. And that is where LOT comes in. So the learning opportunity threshold is a needs-based proration. It's an effort to ensure that the school districts that are most reliant on impact aid get more of their payment. Each LEA will have its own lot percentage, and that is calculated by its percentage of enrollment of federally connected students and the percentage of the local school district's budget that's made up of the impact aid maximum payment. And a lot percentage may never be higher than 100%. And so kind of here's how that works. So let's say there was a school district that's maximum or full funding payment is $100,000. Their total current expenditure from 3 years ago, and that is the number used based on the lag in reporting and data analysis. The TCE from 3 years ago was $2 million. So $100,000 is 5% of $2 million. Let's say that school district has 25% of their ADA being federally connected students. So their lot percentage, you're going to add those two numbers together, 25 plus 5, that district has a 30% lot. What that means is that if the congressional appropriation can pay out at 100% of lot, that school district will get 30% of that full funding payment. So that is the proration. You get your lot percentage, and then if you will maybe hear us talk about 100% lot rate. If you can pay out at 100% lot, you get your full lot percentage of your maximum impact aid payment. Another challenge is that sometimes the congressional appropriation doesn't allow us to pay out at 100% lot. If that's the case, and for example, it was in FY26, paid out just over 96% a lot. If appropriations aren't high enough to fund lot, that means every school district gets an equal percentage of their lot that is less than 100%. So for example, in FY26, every school district got 96% of their lot payment. So that school district in our previous example would have gotten 96% of $30,000. If the appropriation is enough to fund over 100% a lot, that means all of the highest need districts, the 100% lot districts, get their maximum payment, and everyone else gets a payment evenly prorated, with no district receiving more than their full funding payment. So, and that has also been the case in recent years, looking back into like 23, I think 24, the appropriations covered 100% of lot, but a challenge as the cost of education rises, the appropriations need to rise with it, or the lot percentage payout drops. And like Jason showed earlier, the 7002 payments overview, this is an example of our 7003 payments overview for FY26, which will be released in the coming weeks. And this is for the state of Ohio. And so if you look up at that top district, Akron School District, like with the 7002, we have the congressional district there to help with advocacy. We also have the lot. So Akron is a 6% lot school district. If you skip over 2 columns to the full funding, if that school district had its maximum payment as calculated in law, it would get over $1.2 million. However, because the program is not fully funded, it got $106,000 approximately. And so that's where that lot comes in. Now, if you look down a few school districts at Bellbrook Sugar Creek Schools, which is the 4th one down, that is a 23% lot district. Their full funding payment is $625,000 approximately, so way less than Akron, but they actually got $139,000 approximately, which was more than Akron. And that's because they get a higher percentage of their payment because they're more reliant on the impact aid as a part of their budget. They have a higher lot percentage. So that's the general basic support formula, and it is complicated. It's a very complicated formula. It's different than a lot of other federal programs, and we're happy to answer questions on that. I'm going to talk briefly as well about the Section 7003 Children with Disabilities Program, which is a separate payment that school districts receive. It's an additional payment. Now, not every federally connected student qualifies for a CWD payment. The only students that are eligible are Indian land students and military students who have an active IEP. And while most impact aid can be spent on any legal purpose under state law, this payment actually is restricted. The funds have to be spent on an IDEA eligible activity. The formula for this section of the law is way simpler than the basic support. This one, you just take the number of eligible weighted student units across the country, and there are Indian land students and military students who reside on base are each weighted a 1.0, and military off-base kids are weighted a 0.5. You take the number of those kids, you apply the ADAs, you apply the student weights, you add them all up, and you divide it into that appropriations, that 49,316,000 for FY26. And that was actually an increase for the first time in many, many years. There was an increase for FY26 in appropriations. It had sat at $48 million for many years. But for FY26, the payout was $1,215.71 per weighted student unit. So that translates to about $1,215.71 for your Indian lands, your on-base kids, and then $607.85 for your military off-base kids. So again, you do have to verify these students are, 1, connected to federal land, and 2, have an active IEP on the survey date in the student count that you're going to submit with your impact aid application. Now, there's another section of 703E, which is 703E hold harmless. And this is something that's in the law to help school districts when they face a significant drop in their payment. And that can happen for any number of reasons. It happens when perhaps the federal government was divesting itself of a federal housing facility. Um, a military installation could close. Students could leave, a charter school could open and students leave to go to a different, LEA. There's a number of reasons that a school district might face a significant drop in payment. And to help adjust the hold harmless, which was something NAFIS advocated for back in to get into the ESSA iteration of the law. If your school district payment is going to drop 20% or more from the previous year, you will get 90% of that previous year's payment. The next year, you'll get 85% of the first year's payment. And then the third year, you'll get 80% of the second year's payment. And so, hopefully that will help the district adjust to the change in revenue. If you were to ever, if your calculated payment were ever to exceed what it received in the hold harmless, your school district would receive the calculated payment. And particularly given those changes in enrollment over the past few years, there's been a lot of school districts that have been in the hold harmless. For FY26, 415 of the 929 703 school districts were. That's about 45%. So this is a heavily utilized section of the law. For those school districts that receive 703 for serving students who reside on Indian Trust Restrictive and Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act lands, there's an additional requirement, and that is for Indian policies and procedures. So school districts are required to develop and submit these documents that help ensure the LEA's meaningful dialogue with the tribe and to ensure that Indian children are participating in the school program, at equal rates to non-Indian children. Something critical to remember is that IPPs, which are submitted with the Impact Aid application, are not just a static document. They must be implemented, and you must document your implementation of them. So, you should keep records of your consultation, the participation in your meetings, and how you're responding to feedback from tribal members throughout the year. The U.S. Department of Education does review, or they monitor IPP implementation. So you're going to need that good documentation for that. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to your state analyst. It is important to note that tribes, if you have a strong relationship with the tribe and work with them closely already, they can agree to waive the need for IPPs. And the U.S. Department of Education website, impactaid.ed.gov, has sample IPPs and sample waiver letters that you can look at to help you get going. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jason.
Thank you, Ann. So now we're going to discuss section 7007, construction line. For fiscal year 2026, the Impact Aid construction program received $19 million in funding. These funds support two types of grants under section 7007. Sorry, it's a bit of a tongue twister. So section 707A formula grants help eligible school districts meet ongoing capital and construction needs. Section 707B discretionary grants are awarded competitively and are designed to assist districts facing more significant needs. Because the funding is limited, only a few grants are typically awarded in each funding cycle, with priority given to districts that have little to no bonding capacity and are facing emergency repair needs. The program currently alternates between formula and competitive grant cycles in different fiscal years, which helps to ensure that districts have opportunities to access both types of construction assistance. While $19 million provides important support, the demand for Impact Aid construction funding continues to far exceed the resources available, highlighting the need for additional federal investment in school facilities. So here's kind of just some basic overview for things we want you to be sure to take away. Applications for Impact Aid are due on February 1st, 2027, not January 31st, as in most years. That is a Sunday this year. through Impact, and that'll be all done through the Impact Aid grant system, IAGS account. You can find that on impactaid.ed.gov. Your application is, so there are penalties for any late filings there. If your application is 1 to 60 days late, you will receive a 10% reduction in impact aid payment. If your application is 61 days or more late, that will be a total loss of impact aid funding. So be sure to get your things in on time. Please note that you must log into the IAGS system every 120 days to keep your account active. If your account goes inactive, it must be reactivated by your district's core user or the Department of Education. So it's important to regularly get into that program. All payments and payment notifications are done electronically. If your district needs to receive its first FY27 impact aid payment before the end of December 2026 to cover its expenses, please be sure to request an early payment through IAGS. If the department is operating under a continuing resolution for the start of FY27, which seems pretty likely at this point, that means they will receive a small percentage of the FY27 appropriated funds rather than the full appropriation for the year. They will prioritize initial payments for LEAs that need them the most. So NAFIS legislative advocacy is focused on 4 key priorities. First and foremost, we're working to protect the Impact Aid program, ensure that it remains strong and dedicated for federal program serving federally impacted schools. You've heard us all talk a lot about possible interagency agreements and all that. And so that is number 1, our first priorities, making sure the program continues to operate successfully and get you the funds you need. Second, we're advocating for robust fiscal year 2027 appropriations to support increased funding for Impact Aid and its programs. Third, we're continuing to build support for the Advancing Towards Impact Aid Full Funding Act, which represents an important step towards ensuring districts receive the federal support that they are owed. Finally, we are advancing the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act, which will help federally impacted schools address the critical facility and infrastructure needs. Together, these priorities guide NAFIS's work on Capitol Hill and help ensure that federally impacted schools and the students they serve remain a strong national priority. So we hope, so as part of the key parts of our advocacy are our 2 annual conferences in the fall and spring here in DC. We hope to see you all in a few weeks at our fall conference here in DC, which will be held from September 20th to September 22nd. You can find more details and register at nafisdc.org/conferences-events. You can also just go to that, navigate to that through our main website, nafisdc.org, if that was a little too wordy for you. This year's conference it will feature several exciting highlights, some new opportunities for attendees. First, we'll be kicking things off with a rooftop welcome reception at the Hall of States, providing a great opportunity to reconnect with colleagues and enjoy some really nice views of Union Station and the Capitol. Second, we'll be introducing a new and expanded schedule with additional breakout sessions that will give attendees more opportunities to dive deeper into the issues and topics most important to federally impacted schools. And finally, as a political nerd, this is an exciting one for me. We're excited to welcome Charlie Cook, the founder of the Cook Political Report, as our Monday keynote speaker. Charlie will bring his unique political expertise and insight to help us better understand the current political landscape with important midterm elections coming up and how all those elections will shake out and affect our priorities moving forward. FISF, our Federally Impacted Schools Education Foundation, our sister organization, will be hosting a series of technical assistant workshops across the country this fall. These workshops provide valuable opportunities for districts to receive information, guidance, and support on the issues important to your application and your interactions with the program. The workshops will take place in Oklahoma City on September 1st, Washington, D.C. on September 19th, Rapid City, South Dakota on October 6th, Flagstaff, Arizona on October 28th, and Las Vegas on December 6th. We encourage anyone interested in participating to take advantage of these opportunities and to share the dates with colleagues who may benefit from a technical assistant workshop and the resources that we make available there. Finally, it's important for all of us, we encourage you all to stay engaged with NAFIS and stay engaged with our advocacy. You can do so using the NAFIS Action Center, which you can find at nafisdc.org. Quick note there, we are currently transitioning to a new advocacy tool, and the Action Center is still under construction, so you can stay tuned for the launch of our new NAFIS Action Center in the coming weeks. Attending one of our two conferences, as I said earlier, is a great way to meet other folks who advocate on Impact Aid and learn more about the program. We would also encourage you to follow us on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. And with that, I will turn it over to Charisse to close us out.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason and Anne, for really doing a robust presentation on what Impact Aid is. It is complex, as you can see, but the great thing about this is you have a ton of resources at your fingertips. You've got the NAFIS staff, of course, we're the advocacy arm, but we do provide that technical assistance. As you know, we're very well versed in the program, but also we're connected with the Department of Ed and the Impact Aid division. We talk regularly with the director and their staff, and so again, they're always there. I know we dropped it into the chat about the resources. Really want to point you to two things. Really make sure that you're logged into your IEGS portal to make sure your account is active. It does require the 120-day sign in every 120 days. Really, that's a big part of what you need to do. And then also making sure you're connected with your analysts. The great thing about coming to the conference is that the Department of Ed does attend the Impact Aid program, and the analysts are there to talk with you one-on-one. So they're available for one-on-one conversations about your payments, issues regarding your application, or if you just want to get to know them a little bit better. They really are on hand when you need them the most. And more importantly, we mentioned about the newsletter and also the blast coming out for the national office weekly on Fridays. When Fatima, who's the director of the organization, she or the program, she does let us know if there's folks that haven't logged in. She does track those things, how many applications have come in, what's outstanding. So you'll see the weekly blast coming out from our office to remind you of those deadlines, because we all know you've got other things to worry about in your district as well as your schools. So again, we're here as a resource for all of you to make sure you folks are on par as far as you're filing your applications and providing that support in order to collect the information, but also get that application in and give you some pointers as far as when we need you folks to advocate on the Hill or with your congressionals or with your superintendent and so forth to make sure this program stays alive.